Malign Portents. The Hangman's Curse. Lord Slogius leant on his bubonic hammer and breathed a bubbling sigh of satisfaction. The battle had been magnificent, the corpse harvest bountiful. All around him lay fallen Free Guild soldiery, their uniforms torn and filth-splattered, their flesh swelling and rotting at an accelerated rate. His surviving warriors picked their way between the carrion heaps, selecting the finest specimens and hefting them onto creaking wooden carts. Above the mud and ruins of the battlefield, thunder rumbled through yellow-brown clouds. They opened like seeping wounds, drizzling rain as thick and clotted as gruel. "Grandfather drools with delight at our deeds," Slogius bellowed. His sonorous voice rolled across the carrion field, and his rot-bringers raised their weapons and roared back at him in triumph. "Now, hurry swift, my pretty lads, and bring in the crop. There are bodies to plant and nooses to sow, eh?" The hulking Blight Kings redoubled their efforts, tossing bodies into their carts with rambunctious cheer until the mouldering wagons groaned under the weight. At last, Slogius judged that the harvest was done. Turning his rusted helm up to the rain, he chanted a prayer to Nurgle in the old tongue of fallen Gucoria. Foul waters drizzled into his mouth, and he gladly swallowed them as the blessing that they were. Then he turned, beckoning for his warriors to follow, and began the long trudge back to the Leper's Wood. Slogius left his own dead where they had fallen. Their putrescent corpses would seep Nurgle's bounty into the soil, a last gift to turn this barren plain into a garden of fungal delights. The march back to the stronghold took the best part of 2 days. Never did he nor any of his warriors slow their relentless pace. Nurgle's blessings gave them endless succour, and Slogius reflected that they had not toppled Gucoria by taking their ease. They passed fallen Duradin statues furred with muttermoss and crawling with glob slugs the size of cattle. They marched through the cadaverous ruins of cities that he remembered sacking so long ago, their streets now drowning in bubbling swamps, their murals obscured by waving fronds and clouds of thrumming flies. The Lord led his rot-bringers in song as they travelled, a droning dirge that echoed across the lands that they had despoiled for Nurgle. Throughout the journey, their crop of bodies ripened, and the anticipation grew. With a connoisseur's eye, he selected those that would yield the finest thrice-ripened death's heads, already mentally mixing the rot mulch and the chemical plagues that he would add to perfect their foulness. Only when he and his warriors crested Festa Crag and began their winding descent into the Valley of Biles did Slogius begin to feel an edge of disquiet. The sensation was wholly unfamiliar to him, and he could not place its source. Yet, as the turgid mists above the valley parted and his stronghold was revealed, Slogius felt shock race through him. The last he had seen it, the Valley of Biles had seethed with life, carpeted end to end by the putrescence of the Leper's Wood. Now it was silent and still in a way he had never seen. Not a single fly droned through the air, neither demon mite, lolloping beast, nor hunched and crooked gorkin moved through the trees. Even the festering boughs were as unmoving as stone, with not a drip, nor creak, nor squelch to disturb the silence. At the forest's heart lay the Hangman's orchard, the centre of his power, and the place where he had ripened his most beloved death's heads. Only there did the mist still cling, yet as he strained his eyes, Slogius could swear that he saw spectral shapes drifting among it. Fleeting impressions of skulls and screaming faces swam through the vapours, there and gone in a heartbeat. Outrage replaced his surprise.
"What manner of interlopers are these that have slipped whilst into my wood and stilled its lively squirm?"
he growled angrily.
"Onward to the Hangman's orchard. There will be a reckoning that they will not relish."
The Blight Kings made haste down the rocky path, hauling their carts of corpses behind them as they moved beneath the forest's eaves. Here they found fresh cause for fury. Every rotted leaf and coiling liana, every swollen tuber and fatted fungus had dried out until it was little more than brittle dust. Those plants the Blight Kings disturbed simply crumbled away, forming drifts over time that looked for all the world like trickling black sand. The closer he and his warriors came to the forest's heart, the more pronounced the desiccation became. At last they waded through sand and dust that piled up to their waists. By the time the Hangman's orchard loomed ahead, Slugus's wrath filled him like boiling bile. The leper's forest was his garden to tend. It had stood for generations, always swelling and growing, always burgeoning with fresh foulness. Some baleful force had sucked the vitality dry in a matter of days, destroying the labours of centuries. Bubonic hammer clutched firmly in both hands, the Lord strode purposely towards the mist. Instantly, he was alone, cut off from his surroundings by a soft and muffling blanket of icy vapours. Half-seen shapes whirled around him. Twitching things flickered into sight and were gone again, all tattered rags and waving hair. His warriors had vanished behind him, as though they had never been. Yet, he still pressed on.
"Great Nurgle, watch over me,"
he muttered, his words falling dead amidst the smothering fog. If his beloved patron had heard his prayer, there was no sign. Suddenly, the orchard loomed up, its thorned boughs emerging from the mist like a skeletal claw closing around him. This is where the Rotbringers had planted the dead, with nooses strung around their necks, so that the gallows trees might hoist them high and ripen them into death's heads. It was his inner sanctum, his lovingly tended garden. Now it seemed strange and alien, and wrath turned to doubt, as he saw the dangling cadavers amidst the fog. It took him a moment to realize what was wrong. The bodies were writhing, kicking and clawing as though deep under water. Their bloated faces turned towards him as one. Stitches popped and tore as their eyes opened, empty sockets weeping viscous green tears. Their mouths yawned wide, disgorging dead maggots and ropey plague fluids. The cadaver's jaws worked, but whatever words they meant him to hear emerged as nothing more than a dusty croak.
"Sacrilege!"
he roared. He swung his hammer with all his might, smashing it into the nearest corpse. The body crumpled beneath the thunderous blow, its noose tearing free from the bough that bore it. The cadaver flew across the clearing and vanished amidst the mist. Sluggius turned and swung again, and again, and again, and again. Anger and disgust consumed him, drowning rational thought.
"This is a place of blessed life, not sterile and death," he bellowed. "You have no right."
The rampage continued, but now he realized that the bodies were clawing at their nooses with mindless, mechanical strength. Some managed to tear through the hemp, dropping from the trees like fly-blown fruit. Others dangled lower as muscle and flesh tore, vertebrae popped loose, and heads messily parted company with bodies. Corpses thumped down amongst the tree roots, only to stir and stagger upright again. The Lord wheeled at the heart of his orchard, seeing corpses stumbling towards him from all around. Their clawing hands reached for him as though beseeching. Their torn flesh leaked waxy slime. Even those he'd smashed out of sight came staggering back through the mists.
"Rotbringers, to me!"
he shouted, but his words echoed back to him, distorted into ghastly screams. Still there was no sign of his warriors, just more dead men, and more than possibly could have been hung from the gallows trees. Some wore free guild uniforms, some wore the garb of old Kokoria. Planting his feet, Swinging his hammer in tight arcs, Lord Sluggius prepared to meet them.
"Come on then, corpses,"
he snarled.
"Let me show you your proper place in Grandfather's endless cycle."
As one, the dead lunged for him, and he swung his hammer with a fearsome roar. Grogok had fought under Lord Sluggius's banner for many years. Always he had been loyal, yet in this battle he had been unable to serve his master. Grogok had plunged into the mists right behind Sluggius, only to find himself wandering lost and alone amongst its vapours. Now, at last, the unnatural fog parted, melting away like ice before a flame. As it did so, he saw his comrades, stumbling in confusion around the orchard. Whatever sorcery had misdirected them and held them at bay, it was dissipating at last. But, as it did, Grogok's eyes alighted upon his lord, and a groan of denial bubbled from his lips. Every tree in the Hangman's orchard was empty. Corpses vanished, nooses dangling like intestines from a ruptured corpse. Every tree, that is, bar one, the greatest of them all, whose branches had twisted and deformed until they wove the shape of a leering skull 50 feet across. From that towering gallows hung Lord Sluggius, helm torn away, nooses looped around his neck in profusion. His body was rent and torn, nameless fluid soaking into the dry soil below. His head was desiccated and shrunken, its flesh papery, eyes white and dead. His jaw hung open, and from within spilled a slow, steady stream of night-black sand.